Poland's President Karol Nawrocki has cancelled a planned meeting with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, in a clear diplomatic snub of the Hungarian leader. Nawrocki's office says the decision came after Orbán's trip to Moscow to talk energy cooperation, a move Warsaw views as dangerously out of step with Europe's stance on Russia. According to reports on November 30th, including from the Kyiv Independent, the Orbán-Nawrocki meeting that was due to follow the Visegrád summit has now been scrapped. The two leaders were originally expected to sit down after the December 3rd Visegrád Group summit in Hungary, but Nawrocki will now limit his visit to the multilateral gathering only. Orbán's office said, and I quote, "President Karol Nawrocki consistently advocates for seeking real ways to end the war in Ukraine caused by the Russian Federation," referring in his policy to the legacy of President-elect Kaczynski, who emphasized that Europe's security depends on solidarity action, including in the field of energy. In connection with the visit to Moscow carried out by Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and its context, President K. Nawrocki decided to limit the program of his visit to Hungary exclusively to the summit of the presidents of the Visegrád Group in Osztrászám. Together with the presidents of the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, he will discuss security and cooperation in the Central European region. The clash comes as Orbán's Hungary continues to rely heavily on Russian energy supplies, even as the wider European Union races to phase out dependence on Moscow. Orbán also recently secured an exemption from US sanctions on Russian energy, arguing that Hungary's geography and vulnerability leave it with no viable alternative in the short term. In a separate twist, Orbán has sparked outrage among allies by arguing that post-war Ukraine should serve as a buffer state between Russia and NATO, rather than fully aligning with the West. He outlined this post-war vision in an interview with a German newspaper, suggesting Ukraine's role should be to sit between Moscow and the alliance instead of joining it outright. Those remarks came soon after his nearly 4-hour meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow, where the two leaders discussed war, energy, and Europe's future security order. At the same time, Orbán has lashed out at Brussels, accusing EU leaders of dragging the bloc onto the side of the war in Ukraine instead of pushing harder for an immediate ceasefire and talks. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, I arrived on the Moscow-Naya Regeza flight. Which these days is much longer than you think. So technically this would be a 2-hour flight. But since one does not want to risk their life unnecessarily, it's not in a straight line, for obvious reasons. What was the time? You have to detour, and it's 6 hours. You have to skip Ukraine, go down into the dangerous Black Sea, and southern Turkey. Both ways? It was 6 hours there. We started at 4 in the morning, and I arrived at night. And back again, 6 hours. I was in the air for 12 hours yesterday, yes. Considering this, we are in good shape. So, the nap? There will be a nap. You know, I indeed had to negotiate 2 contracts recently, and I cannot claim that it was with partners in the same weight class. One in America, to reconsider, to grant an exception from the sanction that applies in the upcoming period to energy routes supplied by specified Russian companies. Watch the news from Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia, which do not have the leverage. They could not negotiate this exemption. It is good that you have a document stating that your energy supplies will not be heavily cut, but you need energy to transport, and that comes from the Russians. Obviously, you are also watching the news. More and more military strikes are occurring on Russian territory, usually targeting Russian refineries and energy facilities. So, how much there will be in that area cannot be known. It depends on the war. For us, we needed the assurance from the Russian president that whatever happens in Russia, the contracted amount of gas and oil will arrive in Hungary even in the winter, and throughout the next year as well. Agreements were strengthened. Now everyone is talking about a ceasefire, about peace, but in the end, when this turmoil settles down, we find ourselves in a situation that provides Hungary with peace, security, continuous military protection, and opportunities for economic development. If the war ends here, if this is the result of the peace negotiations, then it's good. I'm not part of the peace negotiations because I can't handle myself. And it's not like I don't have enough work at home. Well, there is. You just heard Jergo Bujas. How many programs we are running, first-time home creation, tax reduction. I have plenty of work at home. I think that Hungarians need to be involved in these peace negotiations. We need to be there so that, in the end, when a new European security system is established, it won't be something that is bad for us. To achieve that, we need to be at the table. If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. What do I expect in the coming period? This helps to understand why it was important. Beyond ensuring that Hungary has the lowest utility costs in all of Europe, it required the consent of the American authorities. This we have obtained. Beyond that, what is it about? It's also about looking at what the people in Brussels are doing to us. We are among ourselves. We can talk about this directly now. You see, those in Brussels want a Brussels-friendly government in Hungary. A major issue in Brussels is that Hungary has national interests, and we are not willing to subordinate Hungary's national interests to some kind of Brussels bureaucracy's interests. The best example is migration. They decided to make Europe, the whole of Europe, an immigrant continent. Why did they come to this conclusion? This would deserve a separate lecture, but they decided this way. So migrants are not breaking in, they are being let in. They are brought in there, being managed, to use such an ugly expression, because if they didn't want them to be there, they wouldn't be there. Because if Hungary can manage to prevent them from being here, then they could too. Well, they are much bigger than we are. The reason they don't solve it is that they don't want to solve it. And they decided that Europe will be a continent that accepts immigrants. We, Hungarians, discussed this issue among ourselves. We're actually the only ones where it wasn't the elite that decided what should happen, but we discussed it with each other. There was even a referendum, and we said, people, this will determine not just the future of our grandchildren, but their grandchildren's future as well. This cannot be decided by just a handful of members of a newly elected and sitting government. We are talking about a referendum. The Hungarians, I also was among them, decided that we would not be an immigrant country. This is contrary to what Brussels represents. They are doing everything to make the entire continent a welcoming, immigrant continent. We have opted out of this. And I could give numerous other examples. For example, in the whole gender issue, the rejection of what I think is biased education in Hungary, respecting the laws and values of natural education, but they envision a European continent where, as they put it, deviancy and its various forms, without needing to elaborate, you know what we're talking about, so different strange things, are not only accepted parts of European life but already sufficiently in their youth taught to our children as the right way of life. I consider this an attack on my own children, alongside my grandchildren. Brussels has many ideas or convictions about how all of Europe should be in certain matters. Now the war is such an issue, everyone is supposed to be on the side of the war, but we are not. So, we have a conflict with Brussels because of that. And Brussels does everything to ensure that there is a pro-Brussels government in Hungary. This is the fundamental dimension of Hungarian politics. Of course, there is the left, and the right, the market-friendly, the state distribution-friendly, the tax-raising, and taxation. These are all important issues. But within the basic framework, I can position myself regarding what is happening in Hungary today. It is about the fact that there are forces that serve Brussels. Some are ideologically committed even in this way. Some do it for money. Some fulfill a commission to transform Hungary according to how the people in Brussels would like. To steer Hungary back onto the Brussels path. And we say that we have our own country, our own perspective, our own way of life, and we want to arrange it according to that, because we are on a Hungarian path.